I'm here to discuss foreign policy and what's in the realm of the Department of State.
Well,
I think your questions are better directed to the Department of Justice.
Enemies Act,
but I would tell
which
you
is
that
a wartime, which is something that
yeah,
our
but you're
Supreme
asking me a
Court
question
said
that's
can be invoked during
right,
wartime.
but you're
And it's
asking
only
me a
been
question
invoked
that's
during the War of
more
1812, World War I, and World War II.
Senator Tammy Duckworth delivered a forceful challenge to Secretary Marco Rubio, questioning the Trump administration's use of a controversial wartime law and warning that the United States may be drifting toward another unnecessary and dangerous conflict. Her remarks focused on civil liberties, executive power, and the real-world consequences of labeling criminal activity as war.
Mr. Secretary, last March, the president invoked the Alien Enemies Act, a notorious wartime law last used for Japanese internment. He said that he was responding to the Maduro regime's supposed invasion or other acts of war against the United States. But in recent weeks, you, the Department of Justice, and our friends across the aisle have repeatedly said that we are not at war with Venezuela. Secretary Rubio, if that is true and we are not at war with Venezuela, will you advise the president to rescind his invocation of the Wartime Alien Enemies Act?
Well, that was a mechanism to remove people from our country that prevent grave danger. So, for example, we know for a fact that Trinidad was a very dangerous gang. In fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I may have been the first member of Congress.
This is a wartime act, Mr. Secretary.
Well,
are we currently at war with Venezuela?
No, we're not in a state of war in Venezuela.
Okay, the Supreme Court has described the Alien Enemies Act as a wartime power, our Supreme Court. And before now, the Alien Enemies Act was only invoked during the War of 1812, World War I, World War II, when it was used to intern thousands of innocent civilians. Are you really arguing that the president should be able to wield an internment law?
No, but we're talking about two separate things here. So you're talking about the state of Venezuela or are describing the regime. And we're talking about, but what the president designated.
Invoked the Alien Enemies Act.
I know, Senator, but let me be clear with you. No, but what the president was talking about are these gangs that have, and these narco-trafficking groups that are waging war on the United States. There's no doubt. These groups have waged war on the United States. They have waged, for example, Trinidad was not just a criminal gang presence in our street. It is a criminal gang directly responsible for narco-trafficking.
The Trump administration has acknowledged that the vast majority of the men it rounded up and deported to torture under this law had no criminal records whatsoever.
We didn't torture anybody.
Over 75%.
Who did we torture? We haven't tortured anybody. We've arrested people that are members of gangs and we've deported them. We don't want gang members in our country.
Have found that many of the men were here legally. If the administration is willing to lie about who it's targeting under this law, what protections do totally innocent people have against abuse? Again, I want to ask you, will you advise the president to rescind his invocation of the Wartime Alien Enemies Act?
No, of course not. I mean, these are people that are threats to the national security of the United States. But I've described this in hearings in the past, including before
so
you
you're
guys.
Saying that we're at war?
We are absolutely. When it comes to narco-trafficking groups and criminal gangs that are targeting the United States for criminal activity,
we're in a state of war.
There's no doubt about the fact that we're confronting them in a warlike setting because they're waging war on us.
And do the Geneva Convention
They're waging war against us and they're enemy combatants as a result of it. And the fact of the matter is that we are confronting these irregular groups. And that's one of the great challenges of the new century in this hemisphere in particular, is that these non-state actors who possess state-like capabilities in terms of their weaponry pose a grave danger to the United States. I don't think any American would dispute that we have cartels that pose a threat to the national security of the United States.
With all of the other laws of when it comes to warfare. I mean, you're saying that he can invoke this wartime power.
No, I'm saying, you're asking me, I'm here to discuss foreign policy and what's in the realm of the Department of State.
Well,
I think your questions are better directed to the Department of Justice.
Enemies Act,
but I would tell you that.
Which is a wartime, which is something that
but you're asking me a question that
can be invoked during wartime.
But you're asking
it's only
me a
been
question
invoked during the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II.
It's only
been invoked 3 times, and this president is invoking it.
Okay, you're asking me a question about the domestic application of a law that's best directed to the Department of Justice.
No,
it is because you're asking me something to opine on something that's in the realm of the Department of Justice in terms of its domestic application. I can tell you that the United States is most certainly confronting terrorist and criminal organizations operating in our hemisphere that pose a grave danger to the United States. Anyone who believes that gangs that flood our country with fentanyl or cocaine are not threats to the United States is not living in reality and certainly does not reflect the opinion of most Americans.
The president already said that he was ready to put American troops in Venezuela again. So we're at war right now. So if things don't go well with the Chavistas you've empowered,
when did the president say he was going to put troops in Venezuela?
A military option, what is your criteria for returning to a military option and putting boots on?
Well, I don't recall the president saying he was going to put troops in Venezuela. Where did he say that?
I'm asking you, what are your...
But that's what you said. I didn't remember the president
has already said that he was ready to put American troops in Venezuela.
No, I think the president has said that he retains the right as commander-in-chief to protect the United States against any imminent threats. Maybe that involves troops. Maybe that involves air power. We hope, but we don't anticipate that being the case in Venezuela.
I worry that you're playing fast and loose with our nation's
Well, I just gave
military.
you
And
testimony
let me
here.
just say, I just want to conclude by
Yeah,
saying,
but I just gave you testimony of how well things are moving forward, not as fast as
but
everybody
you
would like.
also said
So
that in 6 or 9 months, if things don't go well, you're going to have to do something else. And the president's already said that he's not ruled out the military option. And you've also just said that, yes, we are at war. The president has
But
wartime
every
powers.
president retains
So
the power to
it's
use military
reasonable
to
for me
protect.
to ask you,
And I gave you a very specific example. Every president retains the right to defend the United States against an imminent threat. Yes, if there are just give you an example, Iranian drones deployed in Venezuela that could threaten the United States, we most certainly will address that, even if it's located in Venezuela. But we hope we don't get to that point. We don't expect to get to that point.
I don't think that
we're not trending in that direction. That's a fact. But that said, on the one
people
hand,
of America
people
are
here
worried that
unhappy
this is
with
a president
cooperating
who
with
engages
Venezuela.
in yet
On the other hand,
another
they want us to
forever
go to
war,
with
Mr.
them.
Secretary.
What's
We
that?
don't need to be in another forever war. And that is the pathway that we are going towards. And let me just say...
Well, how are we
let me
going towards a
conclude- let me
forever
just- let me
war if we're
just
dealing with
conclude.
we're
Well,
dealing
you're
with
not
Delcy
ruling out a
Rodriguez
military
every day?
option. You're not going to ask him to rescind his invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. That puts Americans in jeopardy. And let me just say something about the president's recent comments about NATO allies. When I served in Iraq, there were Polish forces there with us. There were British forces there with us. There were Spanish forces there with us. I personally landed in Elzi, España, which came under direct attack by insurgents. Polish troops who worked with the Illinois military, with the Illinois National Guard for 30 years, died in Afghanistan, Mr. Secretary.
All the
So I
president
just
wants
want
is for NATO to have more
our NATO
capabilities.
allies have stood
He
beside
wants
us,
our allies to
and
have more
we
NATO.
need to maintain the strength of that alliance.
I get it.
yield
All
back.
the
Senator, your
president wants is our
time's
allies.
up. Not making much progress here.
Senator Duckworth's questioning exposed a serious and troubling contradiction at the heart of the administration's policy. On one hand, Secretary Rubio and other officials have stated clearly that the United States is not at war with Venezuela. On the other hand, the president invoked the Alien Enemies Act, a law that exists specifically for wartime use and has a dark history tied to the internment of innocent civilians. Duckworth made it clear that these two positions cannot logically coexist. If the country is not at war, then using a wartime internment law represents a dangerous expansion of executive power that bypasses normal legal protections. Duckworth repeatedly pressed Rubio on whether he would advise rescinding the use of this law. His refusal to do so revealed how the administration is attempting to stretch the definition of war to include criminal gangs and narco-trafficking groups. By labeling these groups as enemy combatants, Rubio effectively argued that the president can treat criminal enforcement as warfare. Duckworth highlighted how this approach blurs critical legal and constitutional lines. War powers were never designed to be used for ordinary law enforcement, and redefining crime as war opens the door to extraordinary measures being used against people without the protections normally guaranteed under U.S. law. A central concern raised by Duckworth was the risk to innocent people. She pointed out that the administration itself has acknowledged that many of the men deported under this policy had no criminal records, and that some were in the country legally. This raised a fundamental question about safeguards. If the government can invoke a wartime law in a non-war setting and then misrepresent who is being targeted, what protections remain for innocent individuals caught in that system? Duckworth framed this as more than a policy disagreement. She treated it as a direct threat to civil liberties and due process, warning that once these powers are normalized, they can be expanded further with fewer checks. Rubio's responses also revealed how flexible and dangerous the administration's definition of threat has become. By suggesting that criminal groups possess state-like capabilities and can therefore be treated as wartime enemies, the administration is laying the groundwork for long-term conflict without formal declarations of war or clear limits. Duckworth connected this to the risk of another open-ended military posture. She warned that this kind of thinking creates a pathway toward yet another forever war, where the boundaries between foreign policy, military action, and domestic law enforcement become increasingly blurred. Her concern extended beyond Venezuela. Duckworth pointed out how vague references to potential threats, such as hypothetical scenarios involving foreign weapons or future instability, are being used to justify sweeping powers today. This approach allows the administration to keep the country on a permanent war footing based on possibilities, rather than clear, present realities. That kind of reasoning lowers the threshold for extraordinary action and makes it easier for presidents to claim emergency powers even when no formal war exists. Duckworth also raised the issue of America's global role and alliances. Drawing from her own military service, she reminded Rubio of the sacrifices made by U.S. allies and the importance of strong international partnerships. Her comments underscored that reckless use of wartime authority does not just affect domestic law. It also sends a message to allies and adversaries alike about how the United States defines conflict, law, and accountability. When wartime tools are used casually, it weakens trust and stability across the international system. Throughout her remarks, Duckworth emphasized that national security does not require abandoning constitutional principles. She argued that protecting the country and protecting civil liberties are not mutually exclusive. In her view, stretching wartime powers to cover criminal activity undermines both. It weakens the rule of law at home while increasing the risk of military escalation abroad. Her warning was clear. Once these lines are crossed, it becomes harder to restore normal legal standards. The exchange highlighted a broader issue about executive authority in modern America. Duckworth's questioning showed how easily emergency powers can be normalized and how difficult it becomes to rein them back in once they are accepted. Her focus was not just on this specific law, but on the precedent it sets. If wartime authority can be used without a war, then the legal and constitutional limits on presidential power become increasingly fragile.